Jai Hind, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Achint. I'm sure all of you can recognize someone very special sitting next to me, Mr. Sanjay Dixit from the Jaipur Dialogues. Sir, thank you so much. I think that, the small introduction that I gave you is far beyond what I could comprehend in terms of what work that you're doing, in terms of educating the Indian public about the reality of various different situations around the country. I'm grateful for the work that you do. I follow you, and I'm honored that you've joined me for a discussion on an Indian hangover of the West.
Thank you very much, Adi. Thank you for this very, very kind introduction. I'm happy to be here with you.
So, can I begin with the first question, sir? This whole Western hangover that we talk about, sir, what is this? And, एक चीज which kind of disturbs me is, why have we carried on with this whole hangover? And lastly, is it all bad?
Let me take the latter part first. It's not all that bad if we can distinguish. The problem is why we have this hangover and why it is bad is precisely because we are not able to distinguish between the roots, not able to distinguish between the logic on which the Western system operates and on which the Indian system operated for thousands of years. And that creates the basic problem, because the entire Western system operates, subsists, thinks, acts. Everything that it does is on a binary logic in a black and white kind of a situation. And I've seen this, even the great thinkers like Hegel and Kant, and even for that matter, the great socialists, the Rousseau, Hobbes, Locke, with the political scientists, even scientists, great scientists, some of them, rather most of them, until Einstein brought in the concept of relativity. They were all boxed in, and they all would go in the binary thinking that their religion, the Abrahamic faith, imposed on their thinking and on their conscience. Whereas the Indian wisdom has never looked at things in two shades. The objectivity that defines the Indian tradition, and that is why we have such a great tradition of sciences. In fact, what has happened is that the Sanskrit language is a much maligned language, because they try to malign it as some kind of a language that is based on just spirituality, and it was only teaching spirituality. But if you really look at the works that are available today in Sanskrit, and only about 5% is spirituality. 95% is what we call Laukika Jnana, that is the worldly wisdom. And the system that we inherited from the British, of course, we had the Macaulayan education system, and we had the elites, and all the elites, of course, at the time, at the turn of the 1950s, it was a transfer of power. So transfer of power was from one set of elites to another set of elites. Everything remained the same. The military elites remained the same. The bureaucratic elites remained the same. The academic elites remained the same. And only the color of the flag changed. And if you look at even our constitution is 80% Government of India Act 1935.
Mm-hmm.
And a bit of wisdom taken from Ireland, something from the Bill of Rights of the United States, something from here, something from there. And directive principles, of course, came from the Ireland, but then we had the USSR and China were always, I think, the apple of the eye of our first prime minister. So we had this hodgepodge in which it was thought, and it was generally conveyed to the elites, that the Indian systems, the Indian traditions, the Indian culture. It was all something that needed to be badly reformed. And it was all some sort of a superstition. It was some sort of a regression that we needed to come out from. And if you have the kind of binary thinking, which you can also call a blinkered thinking, then you know where you will get going on that vehicle. So that is what has actually resulted in this kind of a situation today. And it is only now when we have started comparing things, then we have started talking about comparative religions, not only in the departments of philosophies, but out here in the open. And when we have started demonstrating that we come from much deeper tradition, that our tradition of whether it is the sciences and of course the spirituality, there's no comparison as far as the West is concerned. The worldview of the West is completely confined to the material aspects, whereas a man, as you would know and you would experience, the experience of a human being is so multicolored that he realizes at times, and that's why you see there's so much of money being spent on what is called psychiatric diseases, that the man ultimately finds himself inadequate, that because physical wants have been met, materially he's got everything what he wants, but he still feels that, well, he doesn't have what it takes.
Hmm.
So this is the reason that we always had this inferiority complex towards the West, and that has conditioned almost every set of elites that we have, whether it is in the bureaucracy or it is in the military or even more acutely in the judiciary. All aspects we have that. The only people who brought something Indian were actually the politicians. But then the politics here was as such that they were made to feel small by this set of elites. It includes the academia and the media as well. So I think it's only last 5-10 years that we are pushing back. And that's why you see this conflict.
Sir, I'll keep the pushing back for the next question, but I'd like to dwell upon something that you said, which makes me wonder about something that, and I've heard you saying this on multiple shows as well, the good boy image. You know, India always wanted to be the good boy of the world, that he listens to everyone, you know, this and that. One of the things that I realized that sometimes we've taken steps which were against our own interests. We've agreed to certain things which were against our own interests. Was this because we were just afraid of the whole power of narrative that we will be termed as a bad boy, or the adverse effect of the power of narratives on the domestic politics?
I think a bit of both, a bit of both, a bit of both. Just as I said that there's no clear black and white, there's always that shade of gray. And I think our first prime minister was under great influence of the West. And of course, the person who was responsible for putting him in was actually, I should say, was a great critic of the Western culture. Yet he found someone who was absolutely a brown sahib to actually lead the country. So at that time, when I critique Mahatma Gandhi, that I find that even he suffered from this. And he also suffered with this need for validation. The validation that he used to get this validation from his Islamic friend, so much so that ultimately led India into the partition, wittingly or unwittingly, we are not sure. But then that was the net effect of his quest for validation from the Islamists, starting with the Khilafat movement. And then probably his need for validation led him to endorse Jawaharlal Nehru as the president of the Indian National Congress in 1946, when there was no support from him within the party, not even within the executive, not within the provincial Congress committee, not within the Congress in general. But then using his own support base at the Congress, he's kind of acted as a dictator and pushed him and made him the then what is called the virtual prime minister. Of course, the technical term was something different. I think vice chairman of the the Governor General's Council. So that was de facto prime minister of India. And he owed his position entirely to a person who ostensibly criticized the Western material values. And yet he put into place a person who was all sold out on the Western Fabian socialism. And when I critique Nehru, I am a very big critic of Nehru. I'm, of course, a critic of Gandhi as well, but more so of Nehru. I find in his character certain traits which were of self-loathing. He was the kind of Indian, the self-loathing kind, whom we found proliferated later on. And when we talk about why we have this Western hangover, then that trait of self-loathing persists. And you will find it in among all shades of elites. I come from the bureaucracy. I have spent 35 years in the bureaucracy. Find it here as well, though a little less compared to maybe certain other vocations, such as the media.
Intelligence, yeah, media, yes, sir.
Intelligence, yeah. But then it is there. But then we get tempered because then we come into contact with the public. When you come into the contact with the public, I have seen even in my initial years in the bureaucracy, we always had this tendency of thinking that, okay, these guys, these they belong to some antediluvian times and they need to be reformed and it needs to be brought up to speed and they need to be brought up to date. That kind of disdain that we had through our training in the Mussoorie Academy, for instance. And later on, we realized that we knew nothing compared to these people. These people inherited the great tradition of the country. They inherited the multi-valued logic which drove this civilization, which made this civilization. After all, what are the elements that make up this civilization and that make it very different from the West? Those are our time concepts and our logic concepts, and our concepts of open questioning and what I call our attitudes towards scientific method. And of course, when we go a little more deeper into philosophy, then our epistemology, how we look at the proof. It's not based on a book. It is based on direct evidence. It's based on direct experience. So this is what sets this country apart. I'm in this context, I am very fond of quoting an experience that I had in the villages. That I'll narrate it in Hindi because it took place in Hindi. I think
Sure,
your audience can understand Hindi. So this was this old village woman, and maybe somehow the concept of theft came up. Said कि चोरी बहुत बुरी बात है और ये. That old woman, very innocently, she said, okay, in her own dialect, okay, हमारे तो भगवान भी चोर थे. Just pause and think on this. I was totally blown and shaken, and for 3 or 4 days, I couldn't do anything else. So when she says that हमारे तो भगवान भी चोर थे, then you get the whole idea of a context. You understand? The whole context. And why? Because all our texts are based on context. There's no text without a context in the Indian situation. Whereas when you say theft is bad, this comes straight from the Bible. It's written in the book. There's no context. The playfulness of a child the playfulness of a child that you see in Bhagwan Krishna, for instance. That is the playfulness of a child. That's things that are absolutely with a pure mind. What would you call that? But as per Bible, it will be called theft. And the person would be condemned to hell. So that is where you get the whole context-based understanding of the Indian situation. That's what makes governance in India so difficult also. And that is why you need a great mind to be able to govern India. Because there are no automatic black and white binary situations here. First, you have to understand the context, then you have to act accordingly.
I must say, sir, that's a very deep answer, and that's going to get me to think for a little bit and a whole lot of audience as well. Because the whole understanding of tradition, you've kind of put that into question with regards to the amalgamation of the two civilizations, cultures, histories, with regards to the understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And that's a very important thing, because what may be right for us may be wrong for them, and it's the other way around. So it's the whole, as you said, contextual understanding that is, gone wrong. It's an amazing story, I must say. It's something, and I'll take your permission to kind of quote this somewhere, because
oh yes, absolutely. In fact, I don't know whether you read my Krishna trilogy books.
I haven't, so that I have to, because this is something that you've mentioned.
And that is based on the Krishna story. Actually, that I wrote those. That it's a trilogy. I've written two of them.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is still to come. And I could figure out that our youth could not connect to the Krishna story, because the Krishna story at a very deep spiritual level, and the youth and most of us are actually at the level of at the level of intellect, and we are not able to, nor we are willing to transcend our intellect, which is the teaching of this land. That you have to actually transcend your intellect. You have to go beyond everything. That even Bhagavad Gita says that if you have the direct experience, you do not even need the Vedas. Chapter 246 shloka. So you do not even need the Vedas. Yavanarthe udapane sarvatah samplutodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanatah. Just like you are sitting next to a flood of waters, you don't need a small pond. Similarly, someone who has direct experience doesn't need the Veda. So that is our understanding. We are actually, and the entire Indian tradition is an experiential framework. And when you read the Krishna story in an intellectual framework, you will be misinterpreting it. What I did was that I did the Krishna story, I brought it down to the intellectual framework. And so those two stories have been written. I call it intellectualizing it. So that I've tried to intellectualize the Krishna story.
I must say the choice of words are very interesting, sir. Brought it down to the intellectual framework, which is that's a very interesting choice of word, which tells you that the Indian experience that you speak about is a learning through the journey rather than learning through a book.
Exactly. That's why that 2.46 of the Bhagavad Gita is very, very, it's a very powerful shloka, which I
indeed, sir,
try and recite every day, just in order to get the hang of it. Every day you get a better meaning. So this is the essence of the Indian way. And the Western way, of course, it is limited to the intellect, very powerful intellect, of course. And whatever achievements they have, all very powerful intellectual achievements, a lot of it based on theft, actually. But then right now, they have with their mm, colonialism, then the coloniality that they bred in us through that colonialism, through the instrument of colonialism, and they colonized us into a situation of coloniality, which has continued. And if you really go back and look at their scientific advancement, and you wonder how suddenly somebody could get into great discoveries like infinite series and calculus and things, when 100 years prior, they did not have a concept of zero. And it is then that now the present research shows that all of it was purloined. Yeah.
Used a very sweet term for that, I must say.
Purloined from India.
You've used a very sweet
Jesuits
term.
who came to Kerala, and then you look at the Kerala School of Mathematics and how that whole knowledge got transported. But of course, they never acknowledged it, and they otherwise theft is bad. But then if you steal it from what is called a non-faithful or a heretic, then of course the doctrine of discovery is applicable. You know the doctrine of discovery?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
So the doctrine of discovery becomes applicable. So it doesn't matter whether we had it for thousands of years. As soon as they discovered it, then by that papal bull of I think 1492, they became the owners. Because doctrine of discovery says whatever a Christian first sets his foot on or first sets his sight on, he becomes the owner of it. That is the doctrine of discovery.
It's a sad.
And just to add that, in the 19th century, the US Supreme Court actually endorsed it, because when the native Indians, they thought that democracy has come and there's a great republic and there are these great notions of equality and liberty and things. Then they actually went to Supreme Court, said that these lands have been stolen from us. But then the US Supreme Court said, no, doctrine of discovery reigns supreme. The Christians discovered it, so they have it.
That's spellbounding, Saif. So I'd like to ask you now, you mentioned about the realization, and that's something which is interesting to me, which I see, as you said, there's a trickle of realization. Having said that, I'd like to just take a small example. During COVID, when things were bad in India, just like any other country, articles and posts and talks about how India is doing wrong and all that, and we used to actually get affected. Today, if you look at it with the Russia-Ukraine war, the same articles, the same posts, the same people are criticizing India. And today we say, no, we don't care. Keep saying it's our interest. We look for it. What has changed?
I have talked about it a couple of times. And I think a lot of people have been talking about this for so many days. So a little bit of realization may have dawned on to the foreign policy mandarins also. But I've known Dr. Jaishankar. He is that sort of well-rooted kind of a guy who understands these things, and he has this inimitable style of being able to carry it. That he can say something very drastic, something absolutely, I should say, a sledgehammer kind of a thing with such a soft intonation. And I think it is only since he has come that he started pushing back in this way. And he's openly said, and to say that in the US, in those think tanks, those snooty, those what is called looking down upon everyone else, those kind of things, thanks to go there and to tell them that we don't need your validation. That takes, I think,
Some courage.
really
Yes.
some strength, and that really needs some spunk.
Indeed, there's no question, sir. I think so. What you mean to say is basically a change in the political thinking with regards to India and with regards to the whole subject, which is brought
Yes,
about.
as far as the external affairs are concerned, I'm quite okay with it.
Sir.
And I've been saying this, that this is one aspect of the present government that I'm fairly okay with. It's this present government I criticize only on the internal security and on the on its tendency to not just appease, but to actually uh, completely lie prostrate in front of those, what is called the demanding communities.
Indeed.
That's what I'm.
That I
critical
agree
about.
with you, sir. There's no question. Absolutely right, sir. So I think you've hit the nail on the spot when you mentioned the entire change, and especially coming to the internal security, which brings me to my next question. So every country has its critics, and there is no question. Even in, of course, an authoritarian regime like China, we have internal critics, and we hear from them time and again. Of course, they go missing after some time, but that's a different story altogether. India also has these critics. But one of the things that we note about these critics in India is they are not willing to participate in a debate or a discussion within India. Their entire focus seems to be, focusing outside and participating in a debate about India with non-Indians and in a non-Indian platform. What seems to be the purpose of this misdirected criticism? And it profounds me to just ask the simple word question: why?
That is because our internal security apparatus somehow feels that they need validation. Something that our external security is, our external affairs apparatus has got out of, that doesn't seem to have gone away as far as the internal security apparatus is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And the top echelons are too concerned about the criticisms that they get in spite of the External Affairs Ministry telling everybody that they do not care about the opinions of motivated institutions like the USCIRF or the human rights organizations. In fact, they call them as lobbies. Mm-hmm. This is the External Affairs Ministry.
Yes.
A minister himself has called them as lobbies, he's called them as motivated, and they do that day in and day out in the international fora. In fact, they even decried this Islamophobia, adoption of Islamophobia resolution in the United Nations. And they said that you can't have this as some kind of a one-off, because you have to then call out the entire religiophobia, because we also suffer. We also at the receiving end of it. Mm-hmm. So I do not know why the Ministry of Home Affairs has this dire need of listening directly to these busybodies and not actually take the lessons from the External Affairs Ministry, who has been dealing with it so beautifully. There seems to be some disconnect, and I have been very critical of the National Security Advisor, because I think he seems to be too fond of his own mistaken love with the Sufis and such people. What exactly they are, I have laid down in my book. So they doesn't seem to have any understanding of that history. And he seems to be going totally against his own credo, what he used to spout before 2014 and what he is doing now. This complete disconnect. At that time, he used to say that, he said that in Hindi. It was very powerful. जो भी राष्ट्र न्याय को शक्ति से अधिक महत्व देता है और विचार को कर्म से अधिक महत्व देता है, इतिहास उसे क्षमा नहीं करता. I'm quoting him verbatim. And now you see what he's doing. completely messed up Jammu and Kashmir,
Mhm.
single-handedly, reintroducing the Dulat doctrine. After that wonderful step that the government of India had taken, the Ministry of Home Affairs had guided that entire operation of making the Article 370 ineffective. It was a masterclass. And instead of taking it to its logical conclusion by telling everybody else, all the busybodies, that hold off, this is our own business and we will take care of it. That suddenly the matter was handed over to the NSA and then he made a mess of it because he is an old Dulat doctrine aficionado and he's brought that whole Dulat doctrine from the back door. I can say that from my own information that Mr. Dulat has direct access to the Kashmir division. The Joint Secretary Kashmir division is in direct touch with Mr. Dulat. And you know what Mr. Dulat had done? This entire crisis of Kashmir is in no small amount owed to Mr. Dulat than to ISI.
Yeah.
And I'm using those terms and using that those words very, very responsibly. So this whole business, I remember, this guy Ashwini Upadhyay organized a small, what is called a rally.
Mhm.
It wasn't even a rally on Jantar Mantar or something. First they did not give him permission, and after that they arrested him. For doing what? What was he demanding? That do away with the British laws, the laws that were enacted during the British times, you do away with them. And how can it be a more innocuous demand? But he was still arrested. Why he was arrested? And the police officers were telling him, कि Al Jazeera पे चल रहा है. Al Jazeera पे चल रहा है. So that bloody Al Jazeera, that what is called the scum of a man that called Mehendi R. Hassan is now going to determine how the Delhi police is going to act. Al Jazeera पे चल रहा है. So this is what happened in that Nupur Sharma and Qatar affair, I guess. Al Jazeera पे चल गया होगा.
I don't.
So I think the internal security is in a mess, complete mess. And the whole thing is that they have an examples from within India to follow. They have the example of how some capable chief ministers are dealing with it.
Yep.
You can see how among BJP chief ministers, Yogi Adityanath and Hemanta Biswa Sharma, how they deal with these situations. And among non-BJP chief ministers, look at how Naveen Patnaik deals with these situations. So they can draw examples right from within India. And they don't have to succumb to these Al Jazeera type people. And I don't know, but somebody said that actually the Ministry of External Affairs were very deeply miffed because of this direct Qatar intervention into our internal security without having the External Affairs Ministry on board. Why? I am drawing this only from what is called circumstantial evidence.
Mhm.
Because only 2 days after that, they gave a very terse reply to OIC on the same question, on which the Home Ministry, or rather my Home Ministry, even NSA jumped into it. They had succumbed. And on that very question, they gave a very proper, fitting and strong reply to the Organization of Islamic Conference.
And after that, the entire thing changed.
After that, the entire thing changed.
Absolutely. We seem to have picked up a little power within as well after that particular statement. You're right, sir. Very, very.
So what's going on? I mean, this is absolutely inexplicable.
Absolutely. Indeed, sir. Indeed. But sir, at this moment, I'd like to say one thing very, very critical. It's about today in India, one thing that we've realized, and we can see with various events around us, that public perception, public opinion is not about, not to be taken lightly anymore. When Indians get together and say, this is what will happen, it is what is going to happen. There has been resistance, there has been this thing, there's been that thing, but the move goes on. And I'd like to actually say this, and I'm not saying this because you're on my show, sir, but alternative media, like yourself at the Jaipur Dialogues, and a lot many more people have done a tremendous job with regards informing people of what they can and can't do, and they can and should do, if I may. I don't want to get into the can't part of it, but what they should think and what they should research for themselves. So that is something which is very, very interesting. And we've also seen that uh, we've also seen that in the general mass of the country today, there is a certain amount of awareness of Indianism, if I may use that word. It's probably not a very right thing for me to say, but Indianism has become a very proud thing. We were not as proud of it before. Now, when I come to this, we don't have a structured counter propaganda system within our country, sir. We have people, individual organizations who are doing counter propaganda, who are doing narratives, who are doing information warfare, if I may. But we don't see a governmental structure trying to destroy or deface certain organizations that you mentioned, like for example the Al Jazeera, which is causing us a lot. And one must see the kind of clips that Al Jazeera puts up with regards to the farmers protest, with regards to the CAA, with regards to various different things that happened. Is there no realization within the structure of the country that we need a counter propaganda system? We need an international media for it to project outward. What is happening here, sir?
I think when you say that Western hangover, it displays itself in its starkest in our internal security. And the Indians are aware, as you rightly said, that the Indians, through the internet and through the alternate media, they are more and more aware. They are consuming diverse opinions now. It's not just the one-way opinion that used to hold forth, say about 5, 6, 7, or 10 years back. I think the things have changed immeasurably over the last 5 years. And that's also because of the digital revolution. So that goes to the positive side of what the Prime Minister has done. And the only thing is that once you have let the genie out, there's no way you can put it back. So even if the Prime Minister wants that the people do not go the path of do not go on the path of searching their roots, and that's not going to happen. People will, because that is the natural thing to do. After your wants are satisfied, the first thing you do is that you look inwards and you try and find out who you are. That is the ultimate quest. In fact, that is even taught in the management. In the management, that's for self-actualization. That is the need after the primary needs are all met. So when you are looking for self-actualization, then that's what you will find. And India is so incredibly rich in its spiritual teachings, in its spiritual history, the sheer variety, the sheer diversity, and of course our basic teaching and that says that he is one and he manifests himself in billion, trillion, multi-trillion ways. Eko vashi sarvabhutantaratma ekam rupam bahuda yah karoti. I think this is
Powerful.
probably a Tatri Upanishad. Eko Vashi Sarva Bhutantaratma. That within us he is one. That is Antaratma, all one. Ekam Rupam Bahudha Yah Karoti. That same one form multiplies into Bahudha, diverse forms.
Diverse.
So that is the basic wisdom of this land. So that being the basic wisdom of this land, that is why I've often distinguished between the Abrahamic religions and the Indian religions. They say that, okay, that our vak, or what we call our psychology, is actually fourfold, whereas the West limits its psychology up to threefold, up to the level of intellect. The para, or the beyond intellect, is not for them. So whatever they are envisioning, or whatever theory of religion they have, it is limited to the intellect.
Tangibility, yes, sir.
Not even tangibility. I mean, what God is tangible?
No, I mean, the whole concept of...
They say that God is outside. Tell me, who's seen that outside God? We say that God is inside. And we feel him every day. So where is the tangibility? We have the tangibility.
Yeah, it's the opposite way around, I think. Yes, absolutely, sir.
So I think the Prime Minister would be well advised to actually support this search of the roots that the population has gotten into. And that is why Amir Khan is crying today.
That's exactly what I said. The public opinion is something which is far beyond anybody's control. So if people decide this is what it is, this is what it is. And there's hardly anything anybody can do about it, because it's people have stood their own ground and realized, listen, we're going to do this. And there's nobody pressurizing anybody. It's just something which is as you said, a self-actualization or a self-realization of an Indianism as a concept which is coming out. So this has been a mind-boggling interview, I must say. And I'm going to think about that story that you told me about this old woman who, and it's something which is going to ring in my head for some time. Because
it's detailed out in my books, those two Krishna trilogy books.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to read that right now, because there's something which tells us that there is a lot more that what we can see and perceive. The whole perception about India is something that we've accepted from the world, and which I call a Western hangover. We've not really understood what being an Indian actually means. And today, I think with a whole lot of this discussion, that what we are having a lot more which is taking place at a very small level, I think that realization is coming in. And trust me, sir, I'd like to thank you for taking us through this entire thing, making us understand the whys, the whats, and the whereofs of this entire concept of the Indian hangover that we carry on our backs, on our heads. And I think every day that we do things, we have this innate feeling that we need to be liked by the West. I think that's something that you've brought out very clearly, and I'd like to thank you for that, because it's something that all of us as Indians must realize. So thank you so much for gracing me on my small little channel. It's an honor to speak to you, and of course I'd appreciate a continued interaction with you with regards to learning more about the internal security, as you mentioned, of this country. We're getting stronger and stronger in the external part of it, but internally we do have weaknesses, and that is where there is an opportunity for our adversaries to find cracks. We'll discuss that in the next sometime, sir. Till then, thank you so much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram, sir.